Who hasn't heard of the legend of Truck-kun, that classic anime cliche where some unlucky guy with no future gets run over and reincarnates in a magical world with ridiculously overpowered abilities? The isekai genre has taken the anime industry by storm, with major hits like Overlord leading the way. But there's one series that takes this worn-out formula and turns it into a true epic, a deep, emotional story about the burden of getting a second chance at life. I'm talking about Mushoku Tensei. Unlike most entries in the genre, this isn't just a throwaway power fantasy made for cheap thrills. Here, we follow a 34-year-old unemployed man who dies and is reborn in a new world, but he retains the memories and twisted instincts of his former life. What results is a visually breathtaking series, with world building so rich it puts many Hollywood productions to shame. But don't let the stunning animation fool you. This story will have you laughing, crying over devastating family drama, and more than once cringing at the protagonist's shameful behavior. This is a raw, unapologetic journey of redemption, one where growing up is painful, mistakes leave permanent scars, and second chances come with a heavy price. And that's why today, we're diving into the full and often controversial journey of Rudius Greyrat. We meet a 34-year-old loser who decides to finally do something useful with his life by trying to save some teenagers from a truck, but he ends up becoming roadkill and dying in a pathetic way. Instead of going to the hell he deserved, he reincarnates as Rudius Greyrat, the son of a swordsman and a healer. The problem is, his rotten conscience and perverted memories remain intact inside the baby's body. While any normal newborn would just be pooping their diapers, he teaches himself to read and discovers he can cast magic without reciting those embarrassing chants, proving his hand skills are still sharp. During his experiments locked in his room, he gets a little too excited and ends up unleashing an intermediate level water jet that blows out the wall of the house.
What happened in here?
His mom, in her innocence, thinks the kid just fell out of the window because he's stupid. His parents realize they've raised a monster and hire a tutor to channel this energy. Enter Roxy, a baby-faced mage who initially thinks she's just going to be a babysitter. But when she demonstrates a basic spell, Rudius copies and executes the magic silently, humiliating the teacher in the very first lesson. Realizing the absurd potential of this perverted baby, Roxy accepts him as a student, while Rudius swears that in this life, he won't be the sedentary piece of trash he was in the last one. Our reincarnated ex-bum stays firm in his mission not to be a waste of oxygen, training magic in secret to increase his mana pool. The family keeps Roxy around, and even though she's from a demon race that everyone hates, they treat her well while she teaches Rudius that out there, the supered exist, the boogeymen of this world. The kid becomes a prodigy in magic, but when his dad tries to teach him swordsmanship, he has the motor coordination of a potato, plus a humiliating trauma from his past life that makes him freeze up and shake like a leaf whenever he tries to step past the front gate. On his 5th birthday, Roxy decides the easy ride is over and takes him for his final exam. She conjures up an absurdly massive storm, cumulonimbus, just to show off. But when Rudius tries to copy her, he not only pulls it off, he actually surpasses her, casting the spell with flawless mastery. Roxy sees the student has surpassed the master, declares him a water saint, hands him a protective amulet, and splits to travel the world, leaving Rudius grateful for finally having the courage to touch grass.
I understand what that means to me. Still, as long as I live, I'm gonna respect that girl.
Now that Rudius has stopped acting like a hermit and lost his fear of leaving the house, he sets out to explore the village and immediately runs into human cruelty in the form of 3 brats throwing mud at another kid. Remembering he was a punching bag in his previous life, he decides to play vigilante and blasts a water ball into one of the bullies' faces, sending the punks running. He uses his magic hose to clean the mud off the victim and discovers a green-haired elf named Sylph who is crying over hair discrimination. Rudius adopts the elf as a friend, but when he gets home, his dad, Paul, tries to give him a moral lecture without knowing the half of it. His dad demands he apologize for fighting, but Rudius uses his adult smooth-talking skills to flip the script, proving Paul was being a hypocrite for punishing his son for defending the weak. His dad is left floored and ends up apologizing to the 5-year-old. The friendship with Sylph takes off, and Rudius teaches voiceless incantation, getting shocked when the pointy-eared kid learns it instantly.
Going for me in my old life. Would a convenient skill or two be too much to ask for?
I did it! Rudy, did you see that?
But things get weird after a training session in the rain. They go to take a bath together, and when Rudius, with his 30-year-old virgin mentality, tries to help his shy friend undress, he discovers the package is missing the joystick. The shock leaves him speechless. After getting a lecture from his dad about respecting women, he apologizes to Sylphiette, swearing to protect their friendship and swallowing the surprise of discovering a waifu where he thought he had a bro. The Grey Rat household is celebrating because the mother of our perverted protagonist is pregnant, but the mood sours faster than milk left out of the fridge when the maid, Lilia, drops the bombshell that she's also expecting a bun in the oven. Silence reigns supreme because everyone already knows the culprit is Paul, that rampant breeder who can't keep his sword in its sheath. While the mother cries and the maid prepares to pack her bags and face certain death on the road, our reincarnate realizes he needs to act. After all, Lilia is the guardian of his sacred relics, if you catch my drift. He enters the scene with the acting skills of a pint-sized sociopath and lies blatantly, claiming his dad forced himself on her, transforming Paul from an adulterer into something much worse just to save the maid's skin. The mom falls for the tall tale. The dad swallows his pride and accepts the blame, and the happy family now has 2 mothers and 2 new baby girls, Norn and Aisha. Time passes and Paul becomes a doting father, while the protagonist realizes he's stagnated in his training and thinks about leaving home, but gives up the moment his pointy-eared friend starts crying and clinging to him. But the piece ends when a letter arrives from his old teacher, Roxy, bragging about becoming a water king and living the good life in the neighboring kingdom. Full of envy and ambition, the protagonist asks for cash to go to university, but his dad denies it and tells him to get a job. The next day, a carriage stops at the door, and out steps Ghislaine, a beast woman who is pure muscle and violence. Before the kid understands what's going on, he takes a sword slash to the face from his own father, passes out instantly, and is shipped off like a mail package far away from his little girlfriend, proving Paul's parenting remains impeccable. The protagonist wakes up rocking in a carriage next to Ghislaine, and since the buff swordswoman has the reading ability of a doorknob, he's forced to read his dad's letter out loud. The text is basically a bunch of dirty jokes, and the revelation that he's been exiled to work as a tutor for a noble brat, so he stops being dependent on his childhood friend. Arriving at the mansion, he meets Mayor Philip, who warns that his daughter is a bit difficult, which in noble speak means she's a complete psychopath. When he enters the room, he is introduced to Eris, a raging redhead who immediately proceeds to beat him up.
Come on!
I'll teach you to never raise your hand to me again!
The kid gets beaten like a cheap rug and realizes diplomacy has failed. He and the mayor then hatch a genius plan for a fake kidnapping so he can play the hero. But since the universe loves laughing in his face, the kidnappers who show up are real and brutal. They are thrown into a smelly basement, and when the thugs start beating the girl for real, the protagonist realizes playtime is over. He uses magic to blow open the door and flees with the girl, but they get cornered in an alley. The boy sets off fireworks and hurls stone spikes using magic in a desperate attempt to stay alive, managing to take down one of the attackers. But just as the last bandit is about to slice him up, Ghislaine appears out of nowhere, attracted by the noise, and annihilates the rest of the kidnappers with the ease of a hot knife through butter. Back at the mansion, the redhead finally gets off her high horse and accepts him as a teacher, likely aroused by the violence she just witnessed. After nearly dying, the protagonist and Mayor Philip sit down to talk politics and decide to cover everything up, claiming Ghislaine did all the dirty work, which, let's be honest, isn't a lie. The mayor's wife looks at the boy with disgust, but the one stealing the show is the family grandfather, Saros, an old man who yells louder than a football crowd. He gets pissed thinking his granddaughter didn't do anything, but when he finds out the truth, he punches his own son for suggesting they lie. Impressed by the kid's manliness, the old man officially hires him, forcing his granddaughter to ask for magic lessons in a way so awkward it hurt the souls of everyone present. A month passes, and teaching Eris is worse than trying to teach calculus to a brick. She's violent and skips class, and in a moment of pure perverted genius, the protagonist finds her sleeping and tries to grope her, resulting in a well-deserved beating that almost sends him to the other world.
Here it comes!
Desperate to get the girl to study, he asks Ghislaine for help, who decides to motivate the two kids by telling them how she had to eat monster crap to avoid starvation when she couldn't do math on an adventure. The story about fecal tasting works wonderfully, and the two start studying out of fear of becoming manure sommeliers. As a reward for their effort, they take a day off in the city and see a giant floating fortress in the sky. At the market, Eris decides to spend her allowance buying a gift for her perverted teacher. She chooses a fancy glass bottle, thinking it's perfume, but it's actually an aphrodisiac potent enough to raise the dead. Chaos ensues. Ghislaine breaks the bottle, and the protagonist mourns the loss of the only item that could save his non-existent love life. Rudius continues his cushy life as a tutor for the Boreas family, observing that while Aerys is a prodigy in violence under Ghislaine's tutelage, she has the emotional intelligence of a rock when it comes to etiquette. With the redhead's 10th birthday coming up, she needs to dance for the nobility, but she'd rather hide in a barn than learn not to step on people's toes. Rudius, being the nerd that he is, decides to learn beast and demon languages until he finds the wild girl and convinces her to return with the promise that they'll suffer together. The training is basically Aerys beating up the protagonist while trying to move, a preview of the abusive relationship everyone loves. Thanks to a book sent by the supreme goddess Roxy, Rudius masters the demon language and makes magic wands for everyone as a graduation gift. On the night of the party, Aerys freezes in front of a random noble who mocks her, and she almost punches the runt in the face, proving diplomacy isn't her strong suit. Rudius intervenes with the speed of someone who doesn't want to lose his job and teaches her the secret to success. Imagine the waltz is a fight to the death. The strategy of visualizing murder works perfectly, and they impress the hall with combat movements disguised as art. After the party, Ghislaine gives Rudius a protective ring, but the celebration ends with a foreshadowing of doom when a sinister giant red ball appears in the sky because nothing good can last long in this pervert's life.
What is that?
I don't know, but I don't think it's a bad thing.
What makes you so sure, my lord?
2 years pass, and our favorite reincarnate turns 10, now mastering spells and getting beaten daily by Eris in swordplay. That red sphere is still in the sky, making everyone paranoid, but life goes on as if there wasn't an atomic bomb floating out there. The Boreas family throws a surprise party and gives the kid an absurd staff called Aquahardia, which costs more than anyone's dignity there. But the joy is short-lived when he finds out his parents didn't come because of monsters. So Eris decides to console him in the least appropriate way possible, invading his room and offering herself on a silver platter. In a rare moment of lucidity, or perhaps fear of the interdimensional police knocking on the door, they agree to wait 5 years until they are old enough to avoid handcuffs. Meanwhile, powerful figures like Orstead and old Kishirika realize the red ball is a serious problem. The next day, Rudius goes to test his new weapon of mass destruction in an open field, launching an absurd storm that attracts Almanfi, a servant of the Dragon God who thinks the apocalypse is the child's fault. Ghislaine reveals herself to be a sword king to defend her students, but before blood is spilled, the red sphere decides to explode in a monocalamity, swallowing everyone in a pillar of light and sending the protagonist to the middle of nowhere, resetting his progress to 0.
Lady Aerys, Rudius! Come on!
Rudius wakes up in a white void, chatting with a suspicious entity called the Man God, who warns him he's been teleported but is alive, giving that trust daddy advice before vanishing. The kid regains consciousness in a desert on the demon continent and runs into a warrior with green hair and a jewel on his forehead. Recognizing the supered race, which has a reputation for chewing on little children for lunch, Rudius swallows his fear and strikes up a conversation in the demon god language. The warrior, Ruijerd, says he saved them from the fall, but when Eris wakes up, she freaks out instantly, thinking she's going to be dinner.
No, you're a superb! Somebody help me! No! I don't want to die! Where's Ghislaine?
Ruijerd promises to escort the children, and they arrive at a village where entry is barred until the elder sees a sacred amulet hanging around Rudius's neck. Plot twist: the place is the village of the Ruijerd tribe, and the amulet was given by Roxy, who is basically the local celebrity who ran away from home. Her parents cry with emotion knowing their rebellious daughter is alive after 20 years. While they rest, Ruijerd drops the bombshell of his tragic backstory, revealing his people received cursed spears from that jerk La place, and went around killing killing everything, including his own family. Rudius, seeing an opportunity to gain a final boss-level bodyguard, promises to clear the supered name in exchange for being carried back home, sealing the riskiest deal of his second life. The trio arrives in Rikarisu, but since having green hair and a red stone on your forehead is this world's version of wearing a swastika on your face, Rudius decides to paint Ruijerd blue, turning the continent's most feared supered into a jacked smurf. They go to the guild to register the group Dead End, hoping to clear Ruijerd's name, but discover fame doesn't pay the bills and start doing ridiculous rank F quests that pay less than an unpaid internship. In the middle of the night, the man god appears in the protagonist's dream, looking like a crash test dummy, and tells him to look for a lost cat. When they find the animal in a cave, they discover it's not a rescue, it's a kidnapping, organized by some trash adventurers who do it for the reward. One of these idiots kicks Rudius, which makes Ruijerd switch on berserk mode and almost turn the cave into a human butcher shop. But Rudius, always the sociopathic diplomat, stops the massacre not out of morality, but for marketing. He proposes a wonderful blackmail scheme where the bandits take high-rank quests and pass them to his group to complete, creating an XP pyramid scheme. The criminals, realizing the blue smurf will rip their heads off if they refuse, accept the deal and start spreading rumors that the group Dead End is the most amazing thing since the invention of sliced bread. The plan works, and Ruijerd's reputation starts shifting from psychopathic killer to useful psychopathic killer, proving that with fear and manipulation, you can go anywhere. Roxy arrives at a refugee camp looking for her perverted student, but only finds depression and walls covered in names of the dead. Fortunately, Rudius isn't on the afterlife's cancellation list. She overhears a gossipy dwarf and an elf talking about Paul, that scumbag who can't keep it in his pants, and finds out the old man is alive and sent a letter asking for help finding the rest of the family while he heads to the Millis continent. Meanwhile, the Dead End group takes a quest in the petrified forest. Rudius, with his gigantic brain, sees a group of kid adventurers heading to the same place and decides to have a brilliant idea. Let the kids get beaten up first so he can swoop in later and save the day like a shonen anime hero. There's just one problem with this genius plan. The monsters didn't read the script. A giant snake pops out of nowhere and turns one of the bird boys into dinner before Rudius can even blink, proving hesitation kills more than cholesterol. Eris slashes the serpent, but the damage is already done. Ruijerd gets pissed off and almost strangles Rudius for using human lives as a stepping stone for fame.
You were willing to let a child die for your own self-interest? You can't be serious!
I'm sorry.
Amidst the tension, the leader of the kids takes the blame, which stops Ruijerd from committing a hate crime against the protagonist. Later, a horseman tries to extort them in the city, but it starts to rain. The blue paint washes off Ruijerd's hair, revealing his true supered form, and everyone runs away screaming like they just saw their credit card bill. Ruijerd realizes Rudius isn't evil, just stupid, and they share a bro fist, deciding to finally head to Aerys' home. The group arrives at the port city, and Eris gets all excited seeing the sea for the first time, probably thinking about how many monsters she can kill in there. But the joy is short-lived when they find out the boarding fee for Ruijerd costs more than a kidney on the black market, just because he's from the race everyone hates. Since they are broke, Rudius goes to sleep crying and receives another visit from the man god, who tells him to buy food and go to a dark alley. In the alley, he finds a starving beggar and gives her food. Surprise! The beggar is Kishirika, the empress of the demon world, who is starving because apparently being an empress doesn't fill your belly. With no money to pay him back, she offers a demon eye. Rudius accepts, undergoes eye surgery without anesthesia performed with spit and magic, and gains the eye of foresight.
I think I know just the thing.
Okay.
What the hell?
Now he can see a few seconds into the future, which he immediately uses to beat Eris in training, proving his priority is always massaging his own ego. Rudius tries to sell his precious staff to pay for the ticket, but Ruijerd stops him from selling his magic rod in public. The honorable warrior decides to throw honor in the trash and accepts that they'll have to smuggle their way out of the city. That's when Gallus Cleaner appears, a smuggler with the name of a cleaning product ready to help the group commit international crimes in exchange for shady favors. The man-eater Alina Liss and the drunken dwarf continue their useless search for Paul's family, while Roxy decides to gather intel at a tavern. They spend their time gossiping about the infamous rumors of the Dead End group, without having the cognitive capacity to realize they are talking about her own student. In a cosmic irony designed to annoy the viewer, Roxy walks through the same port city as Rudius, but upon seeing Ruijerd and Eris training in an alley, she activates coward mode and flees thinking she's going to be slaughtered, missing the reunion due to pure incompetence. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, on the vomit boat, Eris decorates the deck with the contents of her stomach during a hellish sea voyage. Upon arriving at Zantport on the Millis continent, Rudius reveals the shady terms of the deal with the smuggler Gallus. They need to steal certain goods to pay for Ruijerd's passage. They break into the warehouse thinking they're going to grab some contraband, but discover the goods are beast children and a caged sacred animal, the wet dream of any cartoon villain. Rudius tries to solve it with diplomacy to keep Ruijerd's reputation clean, but the kids look at him with the terror of someone seeing a pervert. Ruijerd tries to calm things down, but a generic guard with negative intelligence decides to kick the sacred beast. That was the last straw. The supered warrior turns off pacifist mode and slaughters the guards in the blink of an eye. The situation spirals completely out of control. Rudius is captured and realizes the beastmen believe he's the kidnapper, proving that trying to help only brings misfortune. Our perverted protagonist wakes up completely naked in a wooden cage suspended in the forest, captured by the Doldia tribe. Afraid of dying lost in the woods if he tries to escape, he decides to wait for Aerys and Ruijerd to rescue him like a princess in a tower. His solitude is interrupted when a rascal named Geese is thrown into the cell for cheating at dice. While swapping stories, Rudius admits he was arrested for hugging the sacred beast, which in this culture officially labels him an animal. Suddenly, the village turns into a giant bonfire because the smugglers decided to have a hostage barbecue. Rudius and Geese escape the cage, but our hero considers letting the villagers burn out of pure spite. Geese has to give him a reality check for the kid to summon a storm and put out the fire. The leader of the bandits reveals himself as Gallus, the North Saint swordsman they met earlier, admitting he trapped children for rich nobles. He takes a child hostage, but the sacred dog, tired of being an extra, bites the villain and creates an opening.
What the hell?
Rudius takes the chance to use earth and water manipulation, humiliating the elite swordsman. The Doldia warriors return along with Ruijerd and Eris, who were busy saving the day for real elsewhere. The misunderstanding is resolved, Chief Gustav apologizes, and in a plot twist worthy of a soap opera, they discover that Master Ghislaine is the daughter of this chief, explaining where she got her muscles and lack of patience. Rudius starts the day getting caught red-handed peeping on the girl's bath, snitched on by the sacred dog and the warrior guys. After the dust of perversion settles, Eris makes friends with Gaius's daughter, Tona. During a gossip session, the annoying dad sees Eris's ring and discovers she is a student of Ghislaine, the sister he swore had died in a ditch somewhere. He spews poison about his sister, and Eris, with the diplomacy of a rhino, freaks out defending the honor of her wild master. The redhead decides to become Tona's teacher, and they spend 3 months of rain training and creating a sappy sisterly bond. Meanwhile, Rudius throws it in Gaius's face that Ghislaine not only became a sword king, but also learned to read, write, and use magic, leaving the guy looking like a fool for underestimating his own family. When the rain stops and it's time to leave, Tona pulls a teen drama protagonist move, locking herself up and saying she hates Eris to make the goodbye easier. Rudius, manipulative as always, tricks the girl into coming out, and the two make up with the cliché promise to get stronger. Before they leave, Gaius asks for a 1v1 against Eris to test his sister's style and ends up impressed after getting beaten by her student. The group hits the road again, now with the rascal Geese hitching a ride, passing by a monument of the 7 great powers, where Geese explains who the monsters are that Rudius will likely have to face to continue suffering in this world.
I believe the current order is the Technique God at number 1, then Dragon God, Battle God, Demon God, the Death God, Sword God, and the North God. But don't.
After finally arriving in Militian, the holy capital where they probably sell flavored holy water, the group says goodbye to Geese, that guy no one really cares about, but who was strangely useful for something. Rudius decides they need to save money for the next boat ticket, so the psychopathic redhead and the bald spearman go out to shred some goblins, leaving the protagonist alone in the room trying to write a letter to the family he ignored for a year and a half because he was too busy drooling over Eris's While trying to pretend he cares, Rudius looks out the window and sees a kidnapping taking place. Since the dead-end rule is never to abandon a child, or maybe he just wanted to see if he'd gain XP, he follows the bandits. To avoid being recognized, he grabs a random cloth from the ground, which definitely didn't smell like rat piss, ties it around his face, and raids the hideout. But when the leader of the bandits appears, Rudius realizes that mediocre sword style looks familiar. The kidnapper is none other than Paul Greyrat, Father of the Year, and expert in marital betrayal. The reunion ends up in a tavern, but the mood is as somber as a dwarf's funeral. Paul reveals the entire village was teleported and his family is scattered around like confetti. The guy is in such deep shit that he takes it all out on his son, accusing Rudius of living a happy tourist adventure while his mother is missing. Paul snaps and tries to attack the child, being stopped by his little sister Norn, who looks at her brother as if he were a perverted monster.
What do you want from me? I did my best, okay? I was stranded and it totally...
Depressed and with an ego more bruised than the faces of the goblins Aerys killed, Rudius returns to the room. The redhead even thinks about going there to castrate Paul, but Ruijerd tells her to be emotionally useful for the first time, resulting in an awkward hug that is the closest our protagonist will get to female affection this season. We go back in time to see how Paul woke up on a random lawn with his little daughter, not knowing where his wife or the hot maid ended up. Desperation hits hard and he starts a survival marathon, dragging the brat through landscapes that would make Bear Grylls cry. Finding no one, Paul founds a search party and buries his face in booze, becoming that annoying old drunk crying at the bar at 3 a.m. Years later, there he is, reeking of alcohol and self-pity, when Geese appears. Paul starts vomiting his frustrations, complaining that his 11-year-old son hasn't saved the world alone yet. The Monkey Man, being the only voice of reason in that hole, reminds the genius that Rudius is just a child who survived hell. Paul has a nightmare where his son accuses him of abandonment and wakes up in a cold sweat, realizing that maybe he's been a colossal jerk. Back in the present, Paul tries to act like the cool dad at the reunion, but Rudius has that look of someone who ate something bad. Aerys, being the diplomat she is, tries to punch Paul in the face, but is held back by the Superd. When they are alone, Rudius tells his own father to kneel, in a scene that looks like the intro to a questionable adult movie, but it's just for a surprise hug. The old man crumbles, crying like a weaned calf and apologizing for being human trash.
I'm so sorry. Rudy!
The next day, peace reigns. Paul gives his son money to continue the journey because love doesn't fill the belly, and they each go their separate ways to look for the rest of the dysfunctional family, while little Norn continues to think her brother is the Antichrist. Rudius discovers that things aren't looking up at sea and spends the entire trip vomiting his soul out through his nose, while Eris complains that boredom kills more than monsters. The goal is to reach the central continent to see if their luck changes, or at least if the nausea passes. Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, the goddess, the legal lowly, the one and only Roxy, is drinking with Paul's former party members. Some random guy starts making fun of her for being short and single, questioning why she doesn't visit her family in the village nearby. Worn down by exhaustion, Roxy returns to her homeland, the Ruijerd village, where everyone talks via telepathy, and she is the only outcast who needs to open her mouth to speak, like that relative using dial-up internet in 2024. She reunites with her parents, and there's the basic waterworks, discovering they love her even though she's special. During kitchen talk, the old folks mention a human boy passed through there 2 years ago. When the penny drops, Roxy realizes that Dead End, the globally feared adventurer group, is actually her perverted student, the violent redhead and a misunderstood demon. She is shocked to learn Rudius is not only alive but hanging out with a sketchy crowd. Relieved to know he didn't die in a ditch, she grabs her drinking buddies and sets sail for the north, determined to continue the search for the boy's mother and the maid, missing the chance to find her student by a matter of days, because the script loves missed connections. In this generic fantasy world, our favorite reincarnated pervert decides to take a map and encounters the man god, that pixelated, annoying being who only shows up to cause migraines. The glowing bastard tries to make up for past screw-ups by revealing where Rudius's missing family is, specifically Lilia and Aisha in the Kingdom of Shirone. But of course, there's a catch. He warns Rudius to use a fake name, probably because his reputation in this world is already dirtier than a truck stop bathroom. Upon waking up, the group arrives in the city, and Rudius follows the advice, wandering around until he sees soldiers harassing a defenseless maid, a scene so cliche it's sleep-inducing. He saves the girl with magic and discovers it's his little sister, Aisha. The brat is more manipulative than an internet life coach, trying to use cuteness to convince him to deliver a letter. But when Rudius almost slips up and says his real name, she reveals she knows her brother is a degenerate pervert because their mom told her stories, and she found his box of profane treasures at home. To avoid public humiliation, he introduces himself as the Kennel Master, which sounds even worse than the truth. After leaving his sister with the violent redhead, he heads to the palace to deliver the letter to Roxy. Thinking he's got it made, a guard named Ginger invites him in with a fake smile, and obviously, it's a trap. There, he finds Lilia tied up, and the 7th Prince Pax, a megalomaniacal dwarf, who reveals this is all bait to capture Roxy and turn her into a slave, leaving Rudius trapped and forced to watch the horror show helplessly. Our hero is trapped in the anti-magic room, contemplating his own uselessness, when the 3rd Prince Zanoba enters, a nutcase obsessed with dolls who makes any animate figure collector look like a socially functional person. He's holding Ruijerd's figurine, but pulls out the holy figure of Roxy that Rudius made years ago, demanding to know who the Michelangelo was that sculpted it. Rudius, seeing a chance to save his own skin, claims authorship and points out the crucial detail of a mole hidden under the doll's robe, proving he dedicated unhealthy hours to observing every millimeter of his teacher. Zanoba has a near artistic orgasm from such culture and swears eternal loyalty to the master, promising to get him out of there in exchange for sculpting lessons. Meanwhile, Aerys and Ruijerd find out their families are hostages, but they don't even need to break a sweat because Zanoba simply drags his little brother Pax out of bed and threatens to rip his head off with his superhuman strength if he doesn't release everyone. The dwarf shits himself in fear and releases the prisoners immediately.
If you wish to save yourself, you can release Master Rudius.
Fine, you win. I'll do whatever you want. Just let go of me, brother. I'm begging you, please.
At the family reunion, Aisha drops the act and reveals she knew who Rudius was the whole time, but wanted to test if he was really the legendary pervert her mother described, or if there was hope for him. Satisfied that he is a brave pervert, she accepts her brother. Rudius gives her his sweaty headband as a gift, because nothing says I love you like a greasy used accessory. In the end, the 2 crazy princes are exiled to sweep the dirt under the royal rug, and the group bails before any other weirdos show up. The group decides to stroll through the Red Worm's lower jaw, a place with a suggestive name that would have any middle schooler giggling, while Eris is itching to beat up some giant geckos. Suddenly, they encounter a silver-haired guy and a masked girl on the path. Ruijerd and Eris freeze instantly, feeling that primal fear of someone who forgot to take the chicken out of the freezer before mom got home. But Rudius, dense as always, feels absolutely nothing. The stranger, Orstead, recognizes the redhead and the bald guy, but is confused by the useless kid in front of him. The fatal mistake happens when he asks if Rudius works for the man god. Our genius confirms he knows the guy and basically signs his own death warrant.
I wonder, are you perhaps familiar with the name Mad God?
Oh, I am! He's appeared in my dreams and...
Orstead attacks with the subtlety of a runaway truck. Ruijerd and Eris try to defend but are tossed aside like trash bags. The Dragon God crushes Rudius's lung, who in desperation unleashes a magic blast without chanting. Orstead is mildly impressed by the kid's mana, but decides to turn his chest into a donut, thrusting his bare hand through his heart and leaving him to die in the snow. Rudius wakes up in the afterlife with the man god laughing in his face. The pixelated guy explains that Orstead is the 2nd strongest being in the world and has a curse that makes everyone hate him, except Rudius, who is from another world and oblivious. It turns out he didn't die because the masked girl, Nanahoshi, asked Orstead to heal him. Rudius wakes up on the frozen ground, the hole in his chest closed, and finds Eris crying, traumatized by having been as useful as a leaky umbrella in the fight. After consoling his friend, the group continues their journey, pretending they weren't just almost obliterated from existence. Our traumatized protagonist, Rudius, wakes up in a cold sweat after recurring nightmares, where Orstead's face appears to remind him of how insignificant he is. When he realizes he's still alive and hasn't become a human donut, he decides it's time to spill the beans to Ruijerd about the man god and La Place. Basically, he tells him that Ruijerd's race was cancelled worldwide because of a fake news curse, and the bald lancer is shocked to realize he spent centuries hating himself for nothing. At least he discovers that cutting his hair already helped clear his name, proving that aesthetics are everything in this world. The Dead End group arrives at the ruins of Rudius's hometown, which is now just an overpriced vacant lot. Ruijerd, deciding his arc is over, pats the kids on the head like a proud father and leaves to live his life, leaving the 2 youths alone to deal with the trauma. They arrive at a refugee camp where Aerys reunites with Ghislaine, but the joy is short-lived because the butler Alphonse drops the bomb that her parents and grandfather have met their maker. The girl goes into total collapse, ignoring everyone, but Aerys's grief therapy is different. She invades Rudius's tent in the middle of the night wearing almost nothing and demands a new family, making it very clear she wants to manufacture that family right then and there. Rudius goes into a moral panic, magic. But since the flesh is weak and he is a degenerate, he gives in to her charms. The next morning, he wakes up feeling like a Chad, thinking he's finally become a normie with a girlfriend, only to discover the bed is empty. Eris left just a lock of hair and a note saying they aren't a good match. The classic, "It's not you, it's me." The protagonist realizes he was treated like a late-night booty call and discarded, breaking down crying like an abandoned baby in the middle of nowhere. The shock is so great that the protagonist reverts to his past life's factory settings, activating depressive virgin mode and locking himself in the tent to wallow in self-pity, ignoring the outside world just like he did when he was bullied and missed his parents' funeral. While he wallows in his own misery, the butler Alphonse invades his depression chamber to give him a reality check. He warns that Ruijerd has already bailed and that Aerys has been declared dead to the public just so she can train in peace without political interference. The butler practically kicks Rudius out of bed, reminding him that his mother, Zenith, is still missing and that his magic is useful for something other than lighting campfires. Rudius finally connects the dots and understands that Aerys didn't run away because he underperformed in the but because she felt too weak to protect him against Orstead and wants to get swole to be worthy of him. Determined not to be complete trash this time, Rudius comes out of his shell and decides to go after his mom. Meanwhile, in some random alley, our goddess Roxy finds a beggar starving to death and shares her lunch. The beggar reveals herself as Kisharika, the empress of the demon world, who in exchange for a bread roll uses her hack eyes to locate the Grey Rat family. She confirms that Rudius's mom is trapped in a labyrinth on another continent. Armed with this information, Roxy sets off for the rescue, while Rudius picks up the pieces of his dignity and takes his first step as a solo, independent adventurer. Princess Ariel is looking fabulous, having her afternoon tea in the royal gardens, when a mutant boar decides it wants ham for breakfast and attacks. Her bodyguard Derek dies instantly, proving his uselessness. But before the princess turns into puree, an elf falls from the sky like a ballistic missile, crushes the monster, and passes out. It's Sylphiette, who wakes up in the palace with white hair from mana stress, discovering her village has been deleted from the map. Homeless and afraid of suffering prejudice for being a cute elf, she accepts the princess's proposal to become a reverse trap named Fitz and work as security in exchange for help finding her family. Now answering to the name Silent Fitz, the elf disguised as a boy accompanies Ariel to a high society event where the princess's brother and his goons mock her. Ariel resolves the beef by singing a song, which convinces her enemies that she is too dangerous to be left alive. Impeccable villain logic. Later, an assassin breaks into the room, and Fitz activates turbo mode, killing the woman with silent wind magic, but gets traumatized by the violence because deep down, she is still a scared child. Realizing that staying there is a death wish, Ariel decides to bail from the kingdom with the flimsy excuse of going to study abroad. Her guard Luke and Fitz agree to tag along on this gourmet escape. In a moment of bromance, Fitz takes off the sunglasses and swears eternal loyalty, not as a paid servant, but as a best friend in the friend zone. The trio puts on their boots and sets off through the snowy mountains heading north, starting their life as luxury exiles. Our protagonist, now sunken in depression, wanders through the north with a heart more shattered than a smartphone screen, desperately looking for his mother, Zenith. During the trip to the Rosenberg Guild, he is forced to share a carriage with an adventurer group called Counter Arrow, where the archer Sarah makes a point of showing how much she hates his weepy face, while the warrior Suzanne tries to adopt the kid as if he were a puppy, abandoned in the rain. Upon arriving in the city, Rudius decides that the best therapy is monster-assisted suicide, trying to accept a high-level quest alone with that dead look of someone who hasn't slept in 3 weeks. But Suzanne, seeing that the kid is begging to become fertilizer, drags him into her group. Their genius strategy of hunting grizzly bears goes down the drain when they discover the beasts are covered in dried mud, which basically nullifies the fire magic of our emotionally impotent mage. The group is surrounded and facing certain death, yells for Rudius to run, but he almost gives up on everything because his will to live left along with the redhead. Fortunately, he remembers he still has goddess Roxy and Sylphiette to idolize, snaps out of emo mode, and unleashes silent magic that vaporizes the bears in half the forest. After nearly giving everyone a heart attack, Rudius takes the lock of Aerys' hair he was keeping like a creep, sets it on fire to symbolize he's over his ex, and goes drinking with his new friends, pretending everything is fine while his mental state remains in shambles. Rudius now goes by the ridiculous moniker Quagmire, or the Mud Mage, while trying to spread his fame to see if his mother magically appears. He continues working with Counter Arrow, even with Sarah treating him like radioactive waste every other day. The group, thinking they're going to get rich quick, accepts a rank A quest to collect snow dragon scales, but when they get there, they discover an arrogant swordsman named Soldat and his group have already killed everything, turning the quest into a frustrating walk in the park. While Soldat mocks their incompetence, a massive horde of dragons appears out of nowhere to commit a mass panic sets in. The group separates, and when Rudius reunites with the survivors, he discovers an extra name the Mir became lizard food and Sarah is missing. The trauma of Eris hits hard, and he refuses to be abandoned again, running alone into the blizzard. He finds Sarah about to turn into a buffalo popsicle and saves the girl at the last second.
Sarah! Sarah!
They hide in a hollow tree, and that classic anime cliche happens where they need to hug to generate body heat, a moment that makes Sarah let her guard down and apologize. Back in the city, the unresolved sexual tension seems to have calmed down, but at the bar, Soldat decides to be the biggest jerk in the world, confronting Rudius and shouting for everyone to hear that his little smile is phonier than a $3 bill. Rudius is shaken by the truth to his face, but Sarah asks him out, making the simp believe he finally found a place where he belongs. Rudius is feeling on top of the world after a successful mission and decides it's time to get his romance on with Sarah. What starts as a goofy stroll through the mall ends with him buying her a new dagger, because nothing says I love you like a sharp-edged weapon. The mood heats up. Sarah invites him to her room, and all signs point to our protagonist finally burying his traumatic past along with his sword in the archer's scabbard. However, when it's showtime, little Rudius refuses to rise to the occasion. Sarah, not understanding the problem is the software and not the destination hardware, assumes he rejected her for being ugly and storms out of the room, leaving Rudius humiliated and staring at his own impotence. Later, he gets wasted at the bar until Soldat shows up to bust his balls again. Rudius snaps, punches the swordsman in the face, and breaks down crying, confessing he's terrified of being alone. Soldat, realizing he was kicking a man while he was down, decides to be the bro of the year and takes the kid to a high-class bra, thinking a professional can solve it. Spoiler, she can't. The courtesan, taking pity on his deplorable state, explains that the problem is in his head, not in his pants. The next morning, Soldat tries to help Rudius apologize to Sarah on the street, but decides to defend his friend by insulting the girl's body. The genius plan backfires spectacularly. Sarah slaps Rudius across the face and tells him she never wants to see him again, completing the cycle of misery.
No, Sarah, I didn't... You're the worst.
Rudius nearly throws himself off a bridge, but Soldat stops him and invites the impotent mage to the labyrinth of Eris. He accepts, leaving the city and his shame behind to start from scratch. While our pervert protagonist is trying to play in the snow with a group of random adventurers, a red dragon decides it's snack time and attacks some bears. The giant lizard is already a bit rickety, but it still causes a panic, forcing Rudius to use his earth magic to drop a colossal boulder on its head, turning the dragon's brain into instant pate. Later at the tavern, while everyone is getting hammered, an elf named Alina Liss approaches. She reveals herself as an old companion of the protagonist's garbage father and informs him that his mother, Zenith, has been found in a place that sounds about as safe as a minefield. Since the journey would take a year and winter is coming, Rudius decides to wait, which gives him plenty of time to observe Alina Liss's bustling nightlife as she swaps partners faster than Rudius swaps his soiled pants. This only serves to remind our hero of a tragic detail. His main tool has been on strike for 2 years. He receives an invitation to the Renoa University of Magic, but his honor speaks louder, and he considers saving his mother first. However, the man-god invades his dreams with a wonderful ultimatum, warning him that if he goes to save his mom now, he'll regret it, but if he goes to the university to investigate a teleportation incident, his impotence will be cured. For a pervert, the choice is obvious. Rudius sends his mom to the bottom of the priority list in the name of his lost grabs the nymphomaniac elf, and heads for the university with a smile on his face and hope between his legs. Rudius and his tour guide arrive at Renoa University, where Vice Principal Genius decides an academic resume is useless and demands a duel to prove the kid isn't a fraud. The opponent is Fitz, the prodigy student who wears sunglasses indoors like a total douchebag. Rudius, with the grace of a bulldozer, nullifies his opponent's magic and takes him down in 2 seconds.
Good question. I wonder.
Guaranteeing his spot as a special student and dodging tuition fees. At the entrance ceremony, Princess Ariel gives a boring speech while Rudius realizes Fitz and Luke are her bodyguards. He's soon thrown into a room with other misfits, including Zanoba, who still treats Rudius like a god, and 2 delinquent furry princesses who look like they crawled out of a teenage nightmare. But our hero's focus is the library, where he finds Fitz again. The silent mage helps with his research, but the interaction is cut short when a pair of white pants falls from the sky right into the protagonist's hands. As the universe conspires against him, the furries appear, accusing Rudius of stealing the princess's underwear. A massive beast girl tries to smash his skull, but Fitz intervenes with wind magic. Rudius thanks him, completely blind to the obvious fact that the mysterious mage with a high-pitched voice and a flowery scent is actually his childhood friend, Sylphiette, cosplaying as a man. Proving his magical intelligence doesn't make up for his social stupidity. Rudius's college life boils down to working out, making figurines, and trying to resurrect his deceased member, all without success. He spends his days eating with Zanoba and attending basic healing classes just to fill his schedule. But the real action is in the library, where he and Fitz begin researching the teleportation incident together. The constant proximity to the supposed boy makes Rudius feel strange things, questioning whether his preference has changed or if he's just that desperate. While Rudius deals with his homoerotic confusion, Zanoba keeps bugging him about learning to sculpt. The problem is the big guy has the manual dexterity of an ogre with Parkinson's and breaks everything he touches. Fitz, with his practical wisdom, suggests the most ethical solution in this rotten medieval world: buy a slave. The trio heads to the slave market like it's a trip to the mall and finds a little dwarf girl who looks like she's given up on life. Rudius looks at the girl with her dead eyes and sees a reflection of his past self, fat, useless, and a neat. In a moment of twisted altruism, he asks if she wants to die. When she says no, he buys her, names her Julie, and decides her new purpose in life will be to learn magic to make anime figures for Zanoba. Now his routine includes teaching a traumatized child to satisfy a giant's artistic all while Rudius keeps praying for his tool to start working again. Sylphiette continues her pathetic cross-dressing routine as Fitz, the silent bodyguard. While spending her days stalking Rudius and sniffing the air, he breathes in the city's alleys. She tries to copy his workout routine, proving that love makes people do stupid things like waking up early to run. The playboy Luke, who can't keep his zipper up, casually mentions that his family's genetics are pure infidelity, sending the elf into a panic, thinking Rudius will cheat on her before they even start dating. Meanwhile, Rudius is training the little dwarf Julie in military style, forcing the child to use magic without opening her mouth. But the real drama happens when Zanoba, that plastic-addicted otaku, confesses in tears that his sacred goddess Roxy figurine was destroyed in a duel against the 2 delinquent furries. The protagonist flies into a berserker rage, not for honor, but because they messed with his waifu material.
Zanoba, this is an affront to my master and my goddess. So, are you actually my enemy?
He confronts Linnea and Persina in the courtyard, humiliates them both with a well-aimed slap to the face, and locks them in a room. There, he reveals his true insanity by presenting his holy relic, Roxy's used pants, which he keeps on an altar as if it were the Holy Grail. The girls are terrified by his level of radioactive virginity. Fitz shows up to save the day and draws mustaches on them, lying that it's a forbidden, permanent magic ink. Rudius tries to see Fitz's face, but the elf keeps his glasses on, proving that Superman logic works perfectly against love-struck idiots. Cliff, a new guy, tries to study in the library, but the 2 canine princesses won't stop yapping, forcing him to kick the noisemakers out. Outside, Cliff, the arrogant kid, decides he wants to score Lenalis, the woman with the highest mileage on the entire server. Rudius, acting as a supportive pimp, arranges the meeting. The nymphomaniac elf thinks Cliff is paying for her services, but when she realizes it's a marriage proposal, her corrupted heart melts, and they form the most unlikely couple in the series. But peace is a lie, because the Beast People mating season begins, since Linnea and Persina declared Rudius as the alpha of their pack. That is, until Badigadi shows up, a buff, six-armed demon lord and fiancé of the Empress, who wants to test our hero's strength. Rudius charges his spinning rock gun with enough mana to level a city block and blows the demon to bits. The problem is, Badigadi regenerates instantly, laughs in his face, and retaliates with a punch that sends Rudius to Dreamland.
Well done! Now it's my turn to take a whack.
He wakes up being healed by Fitz, and as a reward for nearly dying, he gets a free pass with Linnea because female dignity in this world is worth less than a health potion. Fitz continues to suffer silently in the self-inflicted friend zone, watching Rudius have fun with his zoo of waifus while Princess Ariel tries to convince the elf to make a move before she becomes a spinster aunt. Rudius, oblivious to everyone's feelings, decides to investigate teleportation and seeks out the university's resident genius, Silent 7-Star. Upon entering the room, he sees a girl in a mask and has a panic attack worthy of a trembling chihuahua, remembering the trauma Orstead left him with. He screams, runs, and faints from fear of a teenager. When he wakes up, he discovers the masked girl is Nanahoshi, the Japanese student he tried to save from Truck-kun in his past life. Unlike him, who was reincarnated as a pervy baby, she came over whole and hasn't aged a day. The girl wants to go back to Japan, but Rudius gives her a resounding no way in hell, since on Earth he was a fat, useless NEET getting bullied, and here he has a harem and magic. Nanahoshi reveals that her summoning is what caused the teleportation disaster that killed Sylphie's parents and scattered everyone. The elf charges in, ready to commit a justified hate crime, but Rudius, with his savior complex, stops the murder. They strike a deal to cooperate, where Rudius provides his infinite mana and Nanahoshi provides the brains, while Sylphie is forced to swallow her tears and accept the new colleague who ruined her life. As Sylphiette continues her cosplay as the mute bodyguard Fitz, she spends her days stalking Rudius, our favorite reincarnated protagonist, tasting the bitter tang of jealousy as he gives his attention to everyone but her true self. She watches him grow closer to the mysterious Nanahoshi, which makes the elf wonder where her courage went, shrinking even more than Rudius's self-esteem. Speaking of the devil, Rudius is at the gym pumping iron with the demon lord Badigadi, who drops a truth bomb and says lifting weights is useless if he can't get it up for women. But when the protagonist asks for a cure for his broken tool, the demon admits he's not a urologist. Rudius continues his academic life, being idolized by two beast girls fighting to be his pet, and helping Nanahoshi prevent another mana disaster, basically serving as a glorified human battery. Depression hits hard when Rudius runs into his old adventuring party and realizes everyone has moved on, including Alina Liss, who got a boyfriend, leaving him all alone at the bar. Desperate for male affection, he tries to approach Fitz at the market but gets a cold shoulder so intense it would make the Ice Age look like a summer day. Whimpering in the corners of the library, he finds Fitz alone and, in an attempt to confront his friend, the two stumble in a moment worthy of a cheap rom-com. In the midst of the tactile confusion, Rudius's hand lands between Fitz's legs, and he notices a disturbing absence. There's no sword sheath there. The shock is so great that he finally realizes Fitz is a woman equipped with airbags on her chest. Fitz flees in a mute panic, but Rudius's brain ignores all logic and focuses on the miracle. After years of drought, the little guy downstairs has finally woken up. Rudius can barely sleep, thinking about the sign of life his tool showed the day before, but by the next morning, the magic is gone. As he walks around frustrated, Luke confronts him, thinking he has a for the bodyguard Fitz, but Rudius plays the politics card to hide the fact that he just wants his junk to work again. Meanwhile, Princess Ariel decides she's had enough of this soap opera and corners Sylphie, telling the elf to come out of the closet and reveal herself to her man. After a bit of crying and reminiscing about the time they bathed together as kids, they hatch an infallible plan involving lies, a manipulated climate. Sylphie invites Rudius on a fake mission to find a flower in the middle of nowhere, and the simp accepts immediately. In the middle of the forest, Sylphie uses a magic ring to summon a torrential downpour, forcing them into a cave to dry their clothes. Just like in a low-budget adult film script, pretending to be freezing and unable to take off her own pants, she asks the protagonist for help. Rudius, playing the gentleman, starts the and as the layers come off, his memory finally connects the dots. He sees the flushed ears, the familiar body, and removes the sunglasses to confirm that the boy Fitz was, in fact, his childhood friend Sylphiette all along. The elf breaks down in tears, confesses her love, and Rudius hugs the crybaby, promising he'll never leave her again, probably hoping his little friend downstairs agrees with the decision. The atmosphere in the cave heats up faster than a skillet on a high flame now that Rudius knows Fitz is Sylphiette. He confesses his love, they share a passionate kiss, and just when everything seems to be heading for a grand horizontal finale, tragedy strikes. Rudius's soldier refuses to march. Rudius strikes the classic Delgiza pose, apologizing for being useless, but Sylphie, being the saint that she is, accepts the mechanical failure and tells him her sad story of how she became Princess Ariel's cross-dressing bodyguard. The next day, she reports the fiasco to the team. Aria laughs in the protagonist's face, but Luke, in a rare moment of male solidarity, defends his impotent comrade and pulls out the secret weapon, a vial of the best aphrodisiac money can buy. Sylphie bursts into Rudius's room armed with wine and the liquid blue pill. They drink the magic potion and the effect is instantaneous. Rudius finally manages to fulfill his biological duty, curing years of trauma with a night of intense cardio. The episode, and the protagonist's dignity, are saved when he wakes up, sees the evidence on the sheets, and cries with joy while hugging the elf, thankful that he's no longer the owner of a limp sword. With his morale restored, he swears loyalty to Princess Ario and announces he's going to marry Sylphie, proving that all a man needs to define his political future is one successful night. That reincarnated bum wakes up with a different gleam in his eyes and something finally stiff between his legs. His friends at the university notice the change, with the Beast Girls commenting that he's in heat, and the glasses-wearing nerd noting the overconfidence of this pervert. Rudius announces that his chronic illness has been cured, but fails to mention that the miracle was his magic wand finally answering the call of duty thanks to Sylphie's intensive healing therapy. Now that the hydraulic system is back online, his priority shifts instantly. He needs to tie the knot and marry the elf. But since you need a roof over your head to have a wife in this medieval world, he goes house hunting. The economic genius decides to buy a giant mansion for dirt cheap, completely ignoring the fact that everyone who lived there was brutally murdered. Alongside the doll maniac Zanoba and the cowardly priest, they break into the house to wait for the curse.
Huh. Hey, what's your problem? Don't just start breaking things.
Pardon me. The door.
In the middle of the night, an assassin automaton made of scrap metal tries to slice and dice the group. Instead of running like normal people, Rudius and Zanoba get excited at the sight of a moving doll, cornering the machine while the priest nearly wets his pants. After subduing the robot and discovering it was only protecting the diary of a lonely genius, Zanoba begs to keep the doll for research, and Rudius agrees, because he understands questionable hobbies all too well. With the house cleaned and renovated, our hero brings Sylphie to see their love nest. He painted the roof green to resemble her original hair color, proving that old fetish die hard. When she starts getting insecure about being a good wife, Rudius cuts the drama, asks for her hand in marriage, and prepares to break in the new sheets. The house has barely been inaugurated and it's already turned into a banquet hall, with Rudius and Sylphie putting together the guest list for the wedding. The protagonist whines because his absent father and catatonic mother can't make it, but that's a problem for another time. Sylphie wants to invite her long-lost grandmother and drags her future husband out to spend money they don't have on designer clothes made from great luck rat fur. To save money, Sylphie skips the chefs and says she'll handle the stove herself, which leaves Rudius so moved he carries her to the bedroom for another round of physical gratitude. On the day of the reception, everyone shows up, even the demon lord Badigadi, who arrives late just to make a scene and steal the groom's spotlight, while Nanahoshi stuffs her face with french fries like there's no tomorrow. A bombshell drops on the nymphomaniac elf Alina Liss. She discovers she is actually Sylphie's grandmother. The shock of knowing her lineage actually reproduced leaves the woman in tears, needing to be consoled by Cliff, who probably sees this as a golden opportunity. The party seemed peaceful until Princess Ariel demands a duel to prove Rudius is manly enough. The opponent is the playboy Luke, who thinks he knows how to fight. Rudius doesn't even use real magic. He activates his cheat eye, predicts the future, and humiliates the watery blonde in seconds, placing a blade against his neck before the idiot could even blink. Defeated and morally castrated, Luke accepts the loss.
You got lucky! No.
Cliff promises to cure Alina Liss's nymphomania curse, while Rudius and Sylphy can finally go back to focusing on what really matters. Rudius's peace ends when a mailman delivers a letter from his father, Paul, that model father who dumps responsibility onto others. The news is great. They found his mother's trail. The bad news, Paul is shipping the two younger sisters, Norn and Aisha, for Rudius to raise, because entering the Begarit continent is too dangerous for children, but apparently not for the eldest son he abandoned years ago. At home, Sylphy tries to teach healing magic to her husband, but Rudius discovers he's great at blowing things up and terrible at fixing them. The conversation gets serious when they talk about children, and Sylphy worries her elf genetics might make pregnancy difficult, even suggesting he get a mistress. Rudius refuses immediately, proving he learned something in this second life, and assures her he only wants to plant his seed in her garden. At the university, Nanahoshi freaks out when her summoning experiment fails, and she burns months of research. The girl goes into a mental collapse, screaming that she'll never eat ramen in Japan again. Rudius, pitying the depressed isekai victim, assembles the Avengers of Magic, Zanoba, Cliff, and the other beasts to solve the problem. They redesign the magic circles in 3 dimensions, and, in a moment of absolute tension, manage to summon an empty plastic bottle. The group celebrates this recyclable trash as if it were the Holy Grail. On the way home, drunk on happiness and soda, Rudius hears familiar shouting. It's his sisters fighting in the snow, and the one watching over them isn't some common babysitter, but the most dangerous bald man in the world, Ruijerd, returning to scare the neighborhood and ensure Rubius's life will never be quiet again. Only this time, he brought Rudius's sisters in tow. They have a nostalgic chat where they mention how Ruijerd almost gave Roxy a heart attack just by existing, and try to justify Eris leaving by saying she just doesn't know how to use words, which in her language means she prefers to solve everything through domestic violence. But the family reunion vibe is cut short when Badigadi appears to measure testosterone levels with Ruijerd in an awkward silence of 2 gym rats staring each other down. The next day, the farewell turns into a soap opera. Norn clings to Ruijerd's leg, crying harder than a K-pop fan at the airport, refusing to stay with the brother she swears is a psychopath who beats his own father. Ruijerd takes off, leaving Rudius to deal with the family trauma. Aisha proves she's the family's true gigachad by acing the test to become a maid by choice, while Norn gets mediocre grades and freaks out with envy. After a fight where Aisha reveals she's afraid of being treated like leftovers for being a concubine's daughter, Rudius solves everything with hugs and empty promises of equal love. But the peace is short-lived because the 2 furry bitches from his class hand a mysterious bag to the boss. Before he can see what's inside, he's summoned to Princess Ariel's room, who warns that someone is stealing small-chested girls' underwear. Rudius looks at the bag in his hand and realizes he just became the campus's official fence for used Rudius interrupts class to play detective, but discovers that the mystery of his sister locked in her room isn't bullying, but the fact that she's too dumb compared to the rest of her genetic monster family. Norn developed an inferiority complex so huge she had to isolate herself so she wouldn't have to compare her smooth brain with her brother's. Realizing his mere existence is a personal offense to the girl, Rudius decides to do the only sensible thing. He sneaks into the dormitory and sits by the door like an abandoned dog, waiting for its owner to come back with food. While his stomach starts digesting itself, he has flashbacks of the sweaty, useless fat guy he was in his past life, remembering when his brother tried to use logic, and he responded by continuing to be a waste of oxygen locked in his room.
Stayed totally silent till he was gone. I convinced myself that someone like him couldn't possibly know how I felt.
Determined not to let his sister turn into an antisocial Discord mod like he was, Rudius remains planted there without eating, proving stubbornness runs in the family. Inside, Norn remembers the time she saw Rudius beat their father to a pulp and realizes that perhaps that maniac has feelings. She finally opens the door and the general waterworks ensue. Rudius apologizes for being too amazing. They hug, and the next day she leaves the room renewed, while Rudius feels he finally paid off one of the karmic debts from his previous life as a social failure. Domestic Wife turns into a game of The Sims, with Rudius writing fanfic about how cool the Supered are to clear his assassin friend's name, while Aisha charges a salary to do gardening and humiliates vendors with her pettiness. Everything seems lovely. Nanahoshi gives magic gifts, Cliff makes jerry-rigged inventions at the expense of the protagonist's infinite mana, and Sylphy drops the bombshell that Rudius finally hit the target. The guy put an elven bun in her oven, and the whole house celebrates the fact that he functioned when it mattered most. But the joy of depositing his seed lasts exactly 5 seconds, until a letter arrives from Geese saying the mission to rescue their mother has gone to hell, and they need urgent help. To improve the funeral atmosphere, the man god invades Rudius's dream, with that twisted reverse motivational coach spiel. The bastard tells him to stay home scratching himself, and even suggests he cheat on his pregnant wife to pass the time, guaranteeing that if he leaves the house, everything will go wrong. Rudius wakes up in a cold sweat, but since he has the preservation instinct of a moth flying into a lamp, he decides to ignore the omniscient being who controls fate. Our favorite reincarnate realizes that leaving his mom rotting in a dungeon might not be the attitude of a model son, so Rudius decides to head for the Begarit continent. Alina Liss, the elf who has more mileage than a truck tire, insists on tagging along to ensure he doesn't die of stupidity. Nanahoshi, tired of seeing his face, reveals the location of ancient teleportation ruins that turn a year-long trip into a weekend getaway. Rudius then has the brilliant idea of apologizing to his pregnant wife for abandoning her at the most critical moment of her life, proving his emotional genius once again. Sylph, being the saint she is, accepts everything, and they decide to name the child upon his return, activating the biggest death flag in anime history. Before leaving, Cliff, the ultimate simp, hands over a magic item to contain Alina Liss's nymphomania curse and proposes to her, promising to build a future with someone who requires daily maintenance from other men. Upon reaching the forest, they activate the magic circle and are vomited into a desert that feels like Death Valley at high noon, only with more monsters. A succubus tries her luck, but Alina Liss shows who the true predator is and dispatches the creature.
Disgusting. What a foul stench.
Even with Cliff's magic toy, the elf realizes she needs real fresh meat and stops at a bazaar to recruit volunteer partners to relieve her accumulated tension. The duo continues through the scorching desert, with Rudius exploding giant scorpions and griffins, while Alina Liss does the dirty work on the front lines, until they finally spot the labyrinth city of Rapon. Rudius and his nymphomaniac escort arrive in Rapon and rush to the guild, where they find Geese, who is shocked to see they used a teleport cheat. The monkey man takes the duo to an inn where Paul is in a deplorable state, drinking more than a frat boy during finals week and whining about being a failed leader. To cheer up the old drunk, Rudius decides to throw in his face that he's already married and going to be a father, which miraculously cures Paul's depression with the power of envy or pride nobody knows.
I'll have a child of my own soon. Surprise! Now try and rest up. I can handle it from here.
A kid?
In the strategy meeting, they discover the situation is worse than an otaku's love life. Zenith is trapped at the bottom of the pit, and Roxy stepped on a surprise teleporter a month ago and vanished. Rudius almost has a stroke thinking about losing his lowly goddess, but pulls out a university diary that is basically a game walkthrough, showing the trap map. After a moment of awkward reconciliation with the maid Lilia and his rehabbed father, they enter the labyrinth. Paul takes command and bans fire magic so no one dies of smoke inhalation like smoked ham. Using the stolen map and ice magic, they advance like a bulldozer. Paul tries to show off by running ahead, but gets an earful from Alina Liss to stop being dumb. On the third floor, the protagonist feels a familiar mana signature through the wall. In a dark cave that smells of despair, the mage Roxy runs for her life from crystal spiders that want to turn her into dinner. After a month playing with portals, she falls to the ground, lamenting that she's going to die without ever fulfilling her dream of being a teacher or finding a man to call her own. It's the end of the line for the spinster, or so she thinks as she prepares to become fertilizer. But the script intervenes when a magic circle glows, and Rudius appears out of nowhere. The boy, emotional at seeing his goddess alive, grabs her in a suffocating hug and starts crying. Roxy, confused, and thinking he's reacting to the smell of someone who hasn't bathed in a month, pushes the crazy guy away.
What?
When she asks who the hell this beanpole in front of her is, Rudius can't handle the emotional shock of being forgotten by his own master and vomits everything he ate in the last week right there on the floor. After retreating with Talham, the dwarf carrying the precious cargo, they clarify that the vomit was from sadness, not disgust at her smell. Roxy explains she remembered a cute little boy, not this giant. Geese warns they need to return to the dungeon soon to avoid the trauma, or curse, that stops cowardly adventurers from getting back to work. While recovering, Roxy Roxy asks to go back to calling him Rudy, and they have a cute moment where she sleeps on his back, proving the ship is sailing harder than ever. Before descending to the next level, Paul pulls his son for a man-to-man chat and makes a bizarre comparison between having 2 wives and using 2 swords. A metaphor that flies right over Rudius's hollow head, but we know exactly where it's going. Standing before the labyrinth's final room, Rudius decides it's the perfect time to tell his dad he's banged teacher, but Paul activates the biggest death flag in history and says they'll talk later. Upon entering the chamber, they run into a giant hydra protecting the crystal where the protagonist's mother is trapped. Rudius and Roxy unload everything on it, but the scales absorb it all and the heads regenerate faster than Rudius's dignity around pain. The group realizes nothing works and retreats to the magic circle with their tails between their legs. At the camp, Paul freaks out, but Rudius uses his cold logic of a 30-year-old ex-fat guy to calm the old man down. Roxy, being the only one with a functional brain, identifies the monster and they hatch a plan where Paul cuts the heads and Rudius cauterizes the stumps with fire to stop the thing from growing back. Before going back, Paul asks his son to save his mother at any cost, effectively guaranteeing he won't be coming home in one piece. Back in the boss room, the strategy works and Paul turns into a human blender slicing necks while Rudius burns everything. But just as they are about to win, the Hydra launches a desperate attack. Rudius stands there spacing out like a glitched NPC, and, to save his hide, Paul kicks his son away and tanks the attack alone. Rudius gets up and blasts the last head, winning the fight. The crystal shatters and Zenith falls to the ground, but victory tastes like ash when he sees Paul has been cut in half at the waist, ending his career as a father and husband in the worst way possible. Paul is dead and Rudius now has to deal with his father's corpse while his mother wakes up not knowing what day it is. With his father dead and buried, Rudius enters deep depression mode, locking himself in his room to reflect on how he was trash in his past life too. Roxy tries to cheer the kid up, but he rejects the help. However, she decides that the best therapy for grief is extreme physical contact, so she invades his personal space, confronts his self-loathing, and offers her body as consolation. Rudius, who never refuses an opportunity to be a degenerate, accepts the teacher's holy healing, and they resolve the sadness through horizontal intimacy. The next morning, Rudius is already recovered, proving that the power of the religion is absolute. They visit Lilia and Zenith, but discover his mother has turned into a vegetable who reacts to nothing.
She just lost her memory. Guess that's good. It's not like she's completely brain dead.
Since there's nothing to do there besides changing geriatric diapers, the group decides to return home. On the way, Alina pulls Rudius aside and suggests he commit polygamy, telling him to marry Roxy too because fidelity is an abstract concept in this world. Rudius pretends to have a moral conflict about cheating on Sylphie and becoming just like his father, but the desire to have 2 wives speaks louder. He confesses to Roxy that he loves his pregnant wife, but wants to be with her too. Roxy, who has had her eye on him for a long time, accepts being the official mistress, but imposes the condition that he needs to ask permission from wife number 1 before making the harem official. After a hellish journey, Rudius arrives home running like a madman because the man god said he would regret it. He thinks his whole family has kicked the bucket and panics, ransacking the empty house. But then his sister, Aisha, appears with a broom and Sylphie shows up with firewood, proving the only danger there was the protagonist's anxiety. Rudius collapses in relief and gets a hug from his wife, who has no idea about the bomb he brought in his luggage. Later, with the family gathered in the living room, Rudius drops the news that his father bit the dust. The mood gets heavy. He places Paul's ashes and sword on the table and Norn freaks out, screaming that he should have saved Dad since he's such a badass mage. Rudius apologizes and shows his missing hand to prove he tried, and the girl finally shuts up and accepts her brother isn't a god.
I thought you could.
I'll explain everything, okay?
He gives their father's sword to her, and Zenith takes the gauntlets, continuing in her silent vegetable state. When the guests leave, Rudius sits down with his 2 women and decides it's the perfect moment to be an honest scumbag. He explains he got depressed and that Roxy healed him in bed, and then, with the straightest face in the world, bows on the floor and asks Sylphie for permission to have a second wife. Norn gets pissed again, calling him a traitor and cursing out Roxy, but Sylphie interrupts the show. With the patience of a saint, she says she already knew her husband was an incurable pervert and accepts Roxy into the family, making the throuple official. A month later, Rudius's daughter is born, and he cries like a baby, promising on his father's grave that he will take care of this messy family and live without regrets now that he has officially grown up and become a polygamist father.